Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting of the District 2, RTM District 2 to order. Now we have a forum, and thanks to Mike Wheeler for recording and setting up all the technology. The meeting is open to the public, and your questions will be probably seen on channel 79. So the purpose of the meeting is to discuss the budget, the town budget. Mr. Jim Palin is here. He can provide information as a resource. He can make comments, but I want it to be I want the opportunity to be for the people in the district to be able to discuss their concerns or the concerns that they might have of their constituents. Just to review, the budget is coming up for an RTM vote on May 13th. Various committees are going to be meeting and having, preliminary meetings. Tonight will just be a discussion. There certainly won't be a vote, but I want everybody to have a chance to get together and talk a little bit. You want to go around and introduce yourself? I think we all know each other, but let's just try to introduce ourselves. I'm Clara Sartori.
Mike Wheeler, Rules Committee and Planning, Zoning, and Housing.
Liz Bacon, Public Health and Safety.
Peter?
Michael Gassolo, Rules Committee and Planning, Zoning, and Housing as well.
Gail Holtz, TGS&A.
I'm Malin Gasserud. I'm on Finance and Budget.
Charles Teschner, Finance and Budget.
Hi, I'm Peter Marushak, Education.
Okay.
Jeff?
I'm Jackie Miller, and I am Public Health and Safety.
Is that everybody?
Jeff and Cheryl.
I'm Cheryl. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I was having problems with audio before. I'm Cheryl Russell, Park and Rec.
Okay.
Jeff Hudson, Public Works.
Okay.
And I'm Richard Aponte, Public Works.
Hi, everybody. And did Jim introduce himself? He's from the Board of Finance. Okay.
Yes, it's Jim Palin, and I chair your Board of Finance.
Good. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope this can be productive and informative for everybody. I see that we have two people from RTM F&B. Do you want to start off with making a couple of comments about the budget? And if you have questions for Jim, put them out there.
Charles?
Or Charles?
Charles, do you want to summarize it?
From my point of view, it's been, I've only had the pleasure of being on the RTM for 2 years now, but it certainly has been a difficult budget process. And based upon what I've heard, probably more difficult than the prior years. My understanding is that we as a town are facing a number of challenges. In particular, there's been tremendous wage inflation. Some of it driven by union contracts, some of it not. But if you listen to the videos, presentations by the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Board of Education, all of our departments and functions are facing a lot of pressure due to increase in wages, increase in healthcare costs. I think there's been, in particular, a lot of discussion around the increase in education budgets, where as a general matter, we've also had. My recollection was we've lost something to the tune of something like 70 teachers. So the Board of Education teams are feeling a lot of pressure to replace them, to stay competitive in the market, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think, has been sort of the environment. My sense in listening to the two operating entities of the town, the Board of Selectmen on one hand and the Board of Education on the other, it was certainly my impression that John Zagroski and team, I think did an excellent job at trying to minimize the impact on the budget from year to year, although it's fair to say it's still been substantial. I think when it comes to Board of Education, the challenge has been, first of all, it's a much bigger number, and I also think that there are probably, going forward, not only for this fiscal year, but for the next couple of years, room for more holistic discussions around what's the strategy that we as a town have with respect to our educational system, and are we willing, do we see the need, or are we willing to make any types of compromises going forward? I thought, and I'm speaking personally now as opposed to as a representative of the F&B committee. And Jim, the details much better than me. I think the Board of Finance felt the pressure, when was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, basically to kind of, push back on the large increase coming from the Board of Ed by basically proposing a $2 million unspecified cut as to where it would come from. But basically the $2 million was thrown back to the Board of Ed and said, would you guys please go back and do your homework and tell us how you're going to meet that target, such that we can keep the the overall increases in budgets and taxes in the town to acceptable levels. My own view was, I thought the Board of Finance, by the way, I will say in terms of process, Jim, you and team had given quite clear guidance as to what you guys expected would be a realistic increase in terms of education budgets, and the Board of Education came back with a significantly higher number from the initial guidance that you had given them. So I thought that your degree of constructive pushback was appropriate. So I think net we ended up, at least at the RTM F&B committee, we ended up approving last week a new mill rate of 14.69, if I'm remembering correctly, which will be one of the and the overall taxes will be one of the higher levels of increase that we've seen for quite a while. But my own view is that the large majority of that is driven by the structural factors that I outlined at the beginning. So that's kind of my take on the situation. But Malin, please feel free to correct me, and obviously others as well.
No, I think can I just add one little thing? Another reason that we saw the increases, I think Charles's summary was great, but neither budget tried to reduce services to the taxpayer. So it's not like it's not like there were things taken out or a lot of things added. Like John specifically, when he presented his budget, said, this is like the services that we provided this year at the new price point. So I thought that, I just think that's important, is that all these drivers it's not like we're doing things drastically different in this next year.
Okay. Peter, did you have a question?
Well, I have an opinions on this, and then I do have a bunch of questions for Mr. Palin, right? So maybe my opinion about the budget is, the guidance, right? We said we did clear guidance, and I'm all about keeping our taxes reasonably low. That's true, right? And not impacting services that we're all happy both in town and on the education side. But for the last 5 years, right, we just heard that our wealth in this town increased by 29%, which is the average increase in our grand list, right? Which is probably the best guide for us what the wealth is, because we don't have obviously the income data for people, right? So, but if you look at the budgets, our budgets, including the one that's proposed, has gone on 18%, right? So our taxes actually relatively to our wealth, measurable wealth, has gone down, right? Even with the 6.5 million or 7 million that the education was asking for, and they got 5.5 eventually, it would be 20% for education. So yes, there have been increases, but obviously this is a very labor-intensive business running town, right? Board of Finance is involved in a lot of the negotiation of these contracts, so they are aware that there's going to be increases. And I heard at that April 9th meeting how we justified a 3 to 4%. By the way, I gotta say, and we're picking on you, Jim, because you're here, and I really appreciate all the public service that you do, because this is unbelievable that this is a voluntary position. I mean, you're the most powerful man in town, in my opinion. You control a lot of and this is voluntary. I don't understand. You spend 20, 30 hours a week, in my opinion, on this. But in that April 9th meeting, you mentioned that you looked at history, historical trends, agreed contracts, prior budgets, debt service levels. But I don't know if at beginning December you were aware of 13% increase in special ed, right, which is out of our control. At least we say it's out of our control. Transportation up 12%, and I'm talking about the education budget now, right? And healthcare up 14%. If you add these three, it's $5 million out of $7 million ask, right? So it's hard to suggest 3 to 4% increase, knowing these facts, right? So yes, the 1 to 2 million proposed cut that you're suggesting to the Board of Education will have impact on services. We'll find out next week, or week after next, maybe, what it is exactly. But it's anyway. So my point is, we're not overtaxed, right? CPI inflation in tri-state area has gone up 24% the last 5 years. Our wealth has gone 29. Our town budget 17. Our school budget 20. I'm all for taxes, but let's just not let's say that, right? So really, my question is, and I have several, right? Is for the next year. Right? I'm just looking forward, right? Again, we have new contract. All the administrator, other than the superintendent on the school budget, have a new contract that kicked in, right? That for the first year is going to increase taxes by 6.2%. Have you been involved in the negotiation? And if not, this is what's going to come, right? And this is 24, 36 people that run the school system. So if we again say 3 to 4% for next year, it's very likely that we'll have to cut somewhere else. So that's one question. Have you been involved? Second question is, the general fund discussion was great that I thought in your April meeting, but it's still unclear to me what is. And I know we're using some of it, 3 million maybe for this year, 3.5 million. I forgot the figure. How much is there left? By what's the amount that we have overtaxed in order not to lose the AAA rating, right? And I guess my last question is. And that's really for all of us is the process, right? We're supposed to on May 13 to approve or maybe not approve, right? The proposal is 4.8% increase in taxes, right? Not in taxes, but in the budget. That translates into 6% increase actually for individuals because of the reasons that Mr. Palin explained in April. Residential taxes are a little bit higher than commercial. But what about if we want to, some of us maybe want to do 4% and some of us want to say, go back. We don't want this $2 million cut, right? What's the process? And I always want to get educated on it. And, and I don't know if somebody can help me if we can actually mandate the Board of Finance and Board of to go back and increase the budget. So anyway, so there's a bunch of questions. So I'll stop here for now.
Okay. Let's let Jim answer some of your questions, but you asked about the general fund, you asked about the process, and there was another question. Let Jim give some of his perspective, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I think, Peter, a lot of very good questions here. I don't have a pencil and paper handy, so I may not remember all of them, right? But I guess maybe starting at the beginning, I think you touched on the notion of guidance. We did give guidance in December at the state of the town, right? And then we gave further guidance to both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education during their individual budget deliberations before they sort of voted on the budget. That guidance, is really trying to marry both things that we're seeing happen on the expenditure side for the price of delivering services, but then also what we see on the left side, which is what we see happening to taxes, right? I think I've said this many times at a number of my different speeches. In terms of Darien being a success, I think we need to continue to deliver a sort of portfolio of assets, if you will, to all of our residents, right? We've got 21,000 residents. We have just under 7,000 tax-paying households, 5,000 kids, and 15,000 voters, right? At least my view, and I think many on the Board of Finance share that with me, is that people move here because they want to have solid and very successful schools. They move here because they like the services that our town offers, whether that's police, fire, public works, parks and rec. They like our outdoor space, which includes our 2 beaches and numerous parks and so forth. Right now, we total about 285 acres worth about 600 million of outdoor space and so forth. But I think they also value the taxes that they pay relative to the cost of the homes. So that's something that we have to try to marry, if you will, between the expenditure and services side and what the effect is on taxes, both in the short term and the long term, right? And so that guidance, which was 3 to 4% for the near term and 3 to 3.5% for the longer term, was meant to sort of reflect all of that, right? A couple things that are very unique about this tax year that we haven't seen in prior tax years. You know, every 5 years, residential real estate is revalued. And that's per the state general statutes, right? And this year, on average, the just under 7,000 residential homes increased on average 27%. Now that sounds like a lot, but just as a reminder, that homes are not revalued every year unless you to do an addition or pool or things like that, right? It's every 5 years. So what that reflects is about 5.5% appreciation in home values per year for the last 5 years. Also important to note, commercial real estate, which represents under 10% of our overall grand list, right? That gets revalued each and every year, largely by the income approach, where they look at the sort of profitability of the various commercial realty properties, and they use that. So every year that goes up. So what was unique about this year, when we looked at the new grand list, which is a tad under $16 billion from an appraised value standpoint, is that commercial real estate went up by about 5% and residential up by 27%. So what we knew was going to happen is two things. There was some shifting of the tax base, right? Of how we levy the grand list is pushing more of the tax levy onto the residential properties relative to the commercial properties. And so that was a small change, shifted a couple percent of the overall tax levy.
Jim, can I interrupt and ask a clarification question?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Does large-scale multifamily count in that equation you just described as commercial or as residential?
That's commercial. So
Right.
if it's effectively rented out,
yep.
Right, Mike, I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone on the committee knew that the large multifamily counted as commercial, not as residential.
Correct. And I think a lot of these multi-use developments, you see the two at Norotan Heights and the one at Corbin, plus other small ones, are all considered commercial. So we saw a little bit of the shifting of the tax base from the commercial over to the residential. The other thing, and I would encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance to look at, is the state of town presentation, which I gave on page 6. I did a lot of work with our assessor's office, pressure testing what the different quintiles of those 7,000 homes in Darien look like. And we broke them up into 5 different groups, each of which had about 1,500, 1,600 homes on them. And when we looked at how each one of those performed, generally they were between about 26 and 30%. So while the town on average went up by 27%, the individual quintiles also were within 1% or 2 experienced that same type of appreciation. So when you look at like the top quintile and the bottom, there wasn't any material shifting of the tax burden from the very expensive homes down to the less valued homes, right? However, when I look inside of each of those quintiles, there was massive dispersion, right? Inside most of those quintiles, you saw homes that either were
Okay.
70%, right? And so when you think about the effect on the taxpayer, right? If your home goes up by more than the average, you can experience a significantly greater than the average tax increase. And likewise, if your home only went up by 5%, but the rest of the town went up by 27%, you will likely see your taxes going down significantly. On average, it's great to talk about. Within the 5 quintiles, it's accurate to talk about the 27%. But remember, there's a lot of folks that are seeing sort of changing levels of taxation. Another one of the reasons why I thought this would be a tax year where people are going to be acutely focused on the outcome here.
Okay. I think Peter also asked you, Jim, were you involved in the negotiations for some of the labor contracts for the schools? You were there, is that right?
Yeah. So state law dictates that the Board of one representative from the Board of Finance participate with our partners on the Board of Education in all of the teachers' contract negotiations, as well as those of our administrators. It's about 480 odd teachers in our district from a
Right.
full-time equivalent basis. And we had about 35 administrators. Those are each renegotiated as of the last decade, generally on a 3-year cycle. And I participated in the last 2 of both of them, including the teacher's contract. This year, the budget that we're all discussing tonight will be the second year of the teacher's new 3-year contract, and it'll be the first year of the administration's new 3-year contract. So generally, all of the wage increases and other sort of changes that took place in the contract that are applicable this year were, generally speaking, all applicable last year.
Okay, and I think that one of the goals of the contracts has been to attract more people, more teachers here. There's been a teacher shortage, and the idea of increasing the benefits and the salaries came from a need to have more applicants for the jobs and have more people working here. Is that right? And I think that.
Yeah, there are a lot of changes, I think, that, Duke and Jill and Dr. Adley all spoke to around increasing salaries around some of the newer teachers, if you will, to make Darien be more attractive. That was one of the areas, I think, when judged relative to our peers was below average. And so there was, if you will, value kind of put into that end of the steps like 13, 14,
Right.
12, 13, 14, 15. And, there were other things at the high end that were put in place, like the addition of a new step to allow sort of our most tenured teachers to continue to realize the benefits of steps before they, kind of plateau out at the GWI increases, all of which were, I think the Board of Ed, and I was present and part of all those, I think worked very closely with their partners at the teachers to negotiate a contract that I think both parties were, I would say, celebrated.
Thank you. Okay, now let's see. Would other people like to ask questions while Jim is here that relate to not the process necessarily, but the technical aspects of the budget and the increase? Michael Castle, did you have?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
You are, okay. Anyone else?
Well, I have one more
Yeah.
one more comment here is regarding the comment that was made at Board of Finance regarding, listen, we'll cut a little bit of the Board of Education, 2 million, but they can find efficiencies, right? I mean, with all due respect to those 7 folks sitting there, some people understood it, right? And I know you understand it. You spent a lot of hours sort of reviewing it, but this is very inflexible unless you make wholesome changes, and maybe that's what you suggested, wholesome changes, right? But taking 2 million, it's not easy, and well, let's see where the Board of Education comes out. But one thing I wanted to suggest maybe is during every budget season for Board of Education, at least for the last 3-4 years I've been involved, there's always efficiencies that come up, right? It's suddenly in the middle of the process, everybody realizes we have to do it. Now this board, for example, this bus contract that's under, and I don't know if the rest of the caucus is realizing it, but it's we're trying to insource some budget, some bus services for special ed because the pricing we got from our provider for student was just too high, we thought. So I wanted to suggest a standing sort of committee for the Board of Education, but maybe it makes sense to do it in conclusion with in cooperation with you guys, and maybe with RTM Finance or maybe RTM Education. But if there's there's an ongoing sort of efficiency committee, because I don't think the subcommittee of the Board of Education that's focused on finance is either capacity or it's their focus. But there's clearly, if we want to change how it's run, right, our education system, which by the way we're suggesting with this $2 million cut, it'll be good if we're sort of all somehow involved. So I don't know how. I'm sort of throwing it out there now, but I don't know where to sort of start that, and maybe it is with the Board of Education and see if they are accepting it. But
Okay.
Anyway. So
Could, Jim, could you just say a few words about the general fund? You're taking, I thought you said maybe 3 million from the general fund for this year, this tax year. Could you describe how that works and whether the, how much money should be in the general fund? How much is left after you take whatever you take this year?
Yeah, so I think, and Peter, I can come back to the other questions. Happy to do that. I think on the general fund, and just remind everybody, this is a sort of pool of, if you will, like a rainy day fund, which is these are previously tax dollars that we keep around for liquidity purposes and so forth, some of which helps maintain our AAA rating. Generally speaking, the board has targeted this general fund to be approximately 15% of our overall sort of budgeted expenditures each year, right? And for the last 3 or 4 years, as a result of surpluses that have existed in all of the operating budgets and or increased revenues that came in, whether it be on the town clerk side, permitting side, investment earning side, and so forth, that balance has grown. For the last few years, what we have done is we've used that previously taxed dollars, that general fund, to fund all of our capital projects, absent some of the very large ones like the schools and Great Island and so forth like that. But even with doing that, it's kind of continued to creep up. Now, given that our policy and our guidance has been around 15%, given that the budget keeps going up every year, that amount keeps growing. So this year, when we were looking at the amount of excess, if you will, that we have inside the budget, we had to look at 2 different targets. One was the Board of Finance's sort of internal target, which is about 50, which is to maintain it, no less than 15% of the overall expenditures. But Moody's has changed their rating strategy a bit, and they came up with a new metric by which they wanted to see liquidity at the town, including all of our available funds, to be no less than 20% of our total budgeted revenues, which include tax revenues, grants, bond proceeds, investment earnings, and all of that. So when looking at that, effectively, we had about 6 million more in the general fund than what we would need under both of those, the more constraining of those two targets. So effectively what our board did was elect to use half of that this year, right? That decision was made, and I'll speak for myself, but also try to summarize some of the discussion from my partners on the board. Was in part, it was to not spend it all at once, if you will, because we might have additional budget pressures next year. In part, the rating agencies not only look at the absolute level of reserves that you carry, liquidity reserves that you carry, they look at the rate at which they're coming down. So if we were to use them all in 1 year, the rating agencies could look at that as the speed at which they're coming down, or the second derivative by which they're coming down is accelerating. And that could be, based on the Moody's report, a reason to consider a downgrade. So we're also very cautious there, knowing that we just got done building a $60 million school at Oxbridge. We're in the midst of financing about $102 million that you all approved for the 3 elementary schools. And as you know, we just financed part long-term, part short-term, the acquisition of Great Island for $85 million. So effectively, we used $3 million of funds from our general fund. The way we did that was we put about 1.6 million from the general fund will actually go to support the budget. We took another 750 odd thousand, and we're going to have a simultaneous special appropriation that we're asking you all to fund for the Board of Ed to acquire about $750,000 worth of smaller school buses and vans. Okay. And then a remaining $1 million is will remain in the reserve fund, effectively earmarked, if you will. The Board of Selectmen is considering, I think next week or the week after, a security appropriation for the schools, which is a capital item. That'll then come to us and then go to you all. And so the total of what we put into the budget, $1.6 million, the 750 odd thousand for the buses, and the $1.1 million that we've kind of earmarked in the general fund, total that $3 million. And that helped to sort of offset the amount of the tax increase that ultimately will be borne by our taxpayers.
Thank you for explaining that. Jackie, did you have a question? Jackie?
I
Jackie?
did, yes. Thank you, Clara. I thought, Jim, I was so impressed with the way that the financing for Great Island was shared with all of us, all of the detail we went into. And also the promises that we heard during those discussions that we had the money for Great Island, that we wouldn't have to worry about cuts to the rest of our services. So it was shocking to me that in our very first Board of Ed budget after that, we were facing this cut. And as others have pointed out, we knew that contracts were being renegotiated. We knew that these changes were coming. So it's difficult to square the commentary on the Great Island purchase with the cuts that we've made now. And also, as a part of that, I noticed that there's an additional $2 million appropriation in the Rules Committee agenda for next week that is related to Great Island. Can you speak to what that's for?
Okay, so I think your question's on sort of like, I think generally Great Island and other things, how that sort of affected the Board of Ed budget. One thing I would just make sure that everyone in the public and all your constituents knows are, let's just kind of look at what actually happened to the Board of Ed budget. Originally, Dr. Adley proposed a budget of around 6.19%, right? When the Board of Ed, the 9 members there sort of discussed that, at the end of that, they ended up pushing the operating budget from what was 6.19% up to just under 6.5%. So they pushed it up by about another 30 basis points. Okay. To put that in context, they were asking, that budget increase was a $7.5 million increase, Jackie, over last year's budget. And as you and we just discussed a few minutes ago, I think you referenced the contracts and so forth. The contract that exists inside this budget is the identical contract that existed inside last year's budget. So to put this all in context, the superintendent came out with a 6.19% increase. The Board of Ed increased that up to 6.48 by unwinding a lot of the operational changes that the superintendent wanted to make. We then reduced it by $2 million. What does that $2 million increase look like? That's a $5.5 million increase over last year's budget. So that'll be a 4.73% increase versus what was budgeted last year. Last year's budget, which was the first year of the new contract, was approximately 3.4% increase over the prior year's budget. So this year's approved budget, at least by the Board of Finance, which will be in front of you all, in another week or two, right? At 4.73 was the largest percentage and dollar increase in the Board of Ed budget in 10 years. And so I want to make sure for all those people that are listening, there was no cut to the budget. There was a $2 million reduction in the increase that still left the Board of Ed with the largest dollar and percentage increase in 10 years. Now, I think when you think about sort of how they want to sort of deploy that $2 million adjustment, well, effectively the Board of Ed was granted, what the Board of Finance approved was basically a budget that was 98.4% of what they asked for. So they'll need to reduce expenditures by 1.6%, and hopefully they can do that within within their budget without affecting anything that is really important to the education in our schools. One of the things you may have all realized was towards the very end of their budget cycle, the finance director, Richard Brutal, which I think many people have significant respect for, kind of came out with a change that produced over $500,000 worth of savings in the transportation budget by just going back and looking at buying a couple buses that we were otherwise sort of chartering out, if you will, from First Student, right? Dr. Adley put forward close to $500,000 worth of adjustments, which I'll paraphrase, that we're basically calibrating the teacher population with the student population inside the middle school programs and so forth. My view is, and I certainly hope the Board of Education can go back and, like Dr. Adley did and Dr. Rudel and Rich Rudel did, is that the 9 members there working with their staff, who I think are incredibly talented, can go through and look for efficiencies inside their budget to be able to find that 1.6% decrease, which again would still be the largest single increase that the Board of Ed budget has seen in 10 years.
Thank you, Jim. We have, I know Jim has to leave soon. So, Richard, did you have a question for Jim or?
Yeah, I do. I'm a little, I guess, confused because I understand everything Jim is saying about the budget, how it's working, and in 10 years it hasn't gone up or anything of that nature. But my concern is it feels like whenever we're meeting to increase a budget somewhere along the line, whether it's examples, and I mean no offense to anybody but to this, but let's say it was a fire truck, then it was a front loader or tires, or as you see now in the news, the cameras for the police department, education. Is there a way that we're trying to streamline this where it's only that we can address budget issues at a certain time instead of come in multiple phases, where it feels that we're spending a lot more money than what we're getting, and it's a little bit confusing to see how the funding is being worked?
Well, Richard, I think I would echo my fellow board members when I said one of the things that we've asked both of the operating boards, both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, is that to use what I call the off season to think about their policy initiatives, to think about their larger capital projects and so forth, and really give a lot of thought to the use of them, how they're going to design them, the cost and everything. And during this kind of 4 to 5 week budget cycle, focus on the actual operating budget and so forth that they're putting forward, and try not to let new policy decisions or new sort of capital initiatives occupy what is very precious 4 or 5 weeks. The Board of Ed, works hard for 4 or 5 weeks to put together that entire $120+ million budget. And I think when there are policy issues that come up during either one of the board's discussion, I think that detracts from what they need to do, which is year after year after year, search for and find efficiencies in how we can deliver the same services or better services more efficiently with less money.
Thank you. Mike Wheeler, did you have a question?
Yeah, how much are we going to get back from the state on Ox Ridge, and has that money started to come in, and does it go into the general fund, and will that serve to replenish the amount that you reduced it?
So the way that the state on average, it was close to, I think it was close to 6 or 7% in terms of the reimbursement rate that we got. Dan Baumgardner and David Martin are my 2 colleagues that serve on both of our building committees there. That money, there's a delay between when we spend the money and when the receipts go to Hartford to be audited, and then we get our reimbursements back. So some of those monies will be paid to us during and throughout the entire construction cycle. But once we kind of finish the project, right, and put a pin in it, we're done with the punch list and so forth, there will always be some straggling dollars that will come back into the general fund. And if you recall, the way that the bonding and the appropriations and certainly your approval for all of these school projects work are, we need to approve the gross dollars, assuming we get no state funding. And then the state will then move forward with allocating us funding. So, Mike, there's always a little bit of a lag. That money will go back into the general fund. And then we'll use these in lieu of that to fund other small projects that we might have.
7% is a fairly significant number, and I don't see it on any of the revenue projected revenues for next year, that amount of money.
Yeah, most of it has gone back into the construction fund and been used for the actual school project. So like 7%, if that's the number, and I'll defer to Dan, who's not on the call here, but 7% of $60 million, about $4 million, that sort of trickled in throughout that 2-year construction project. And so most of that has already been used. And so while you all appropriate like the full 60 million, that's why we don't bond for the entire amount, because we know that we'll have state revenues coming in, even though you all appropriated for the full amount. So it's not like we're done, put a bow on it, and then the money just all comes in. It's generally trickling in throughout the process.
Great, thank you. One last question for Jim, because he spent more time with us, I think, than he intended to. So does anybody have a question that needs to be answered by Jim? No. Okay, all right, well, Richard, did you have a?
Claire, I know I sent around some answers to the some of the questions that your colleagues had, particularly around like residents and how they would calculate their mill rate. And maybe just to end, to make sure everyone is kind of comfortable with a few numbers out there. The overall tax bill, if you will, that we're raising, total taxes raised will go up by about 4.3% versus last year. That's what we're actually asking residents for.
Okay.
When you look at the effect on the homeowner, right? That for the average homeowner whose house went up by 27% will be a tad over 6%.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I did send the questions and answers around to the group. If you didn't get them, let me know, because we had a few questions that Jim spent some time answering. So including a chart at the bottom and some comments on that go back to his State of the Town report in December. We're going to thank Jim and let him go on. And then I want to just spend a few minutes discussing with the committee any other concerns you might have or anything that you might like to discuss. Is that okay, Jim? Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Claire. And listen,
Thank you, Jim.
As always, if any of you guys have questions, right, ultimately we want to hear them like during our process, so that what we deliver to you in terms of budgets, in terms of transfers, in terms of bonding, in terms of the ultimate mill rate, it matches kind of what you all are looking for. So
great. Thanks again, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the folks on the, Ann, Gail, did you have a question? I can't, are you muted?
Yeah, she's muted.
You were just waving at Jim?
She doesn't have a question.
Okay, okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that everybody, if you have concerns or questions, particularly your own or any that constituents have brought to you about the budget, I want us to have an opportunity to discuss that. So does anybody want to discuss the, I'm sorry, Cheryl?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I was reading in the paper and I had watched part of the EPC meeting on the new proposal for the Thorndale Circle property, which is on the Stony Brook River. And I am concerned about all of those new housing, another new housing complex coming into town, and how this is really going to affect our school system. Between the Heights, downtown Darien, and now this, to me, it seems like a huge building construction in a lot of wetlands, possible flooding downstream. They do put the coal taxes in, and everybody says, oh, it's not going to affect anything downstream. I've seen a lot of flooding over the last few years with a lot of buildings in wetlands where they cut down all the trees. And then, of course, it floods the neighbor's house or something else. So I'm concerned about that. And I was wondering if any of you were also watching that and wondering how big this complex could be.
I guess Thorndale Circle is in District 2, is it? I think. Is that right? Okay. So I haven't heard any more other than what you said. Does anybody have any information for Cheryl?
So what I know a little bit kind of peripherally from my meeting with Steve Mulvaney a few weeks ago, it is, going on the boards for a few hundred units. I don't remember the exact number. It's not the entire parcel. The Nielsen's are keeping, I think, 3 of the office buildings, probably the ones to the east of the site, if I remember correctly. I think Cheryl's concern about wetlands and flooding is a valid one. And I think that's something that will have to be monitored during the approval process. I think that would behoove us and the town to do that. I'm less concerned about the impact on the schools because of, again, they're mostly, I believe, consistent with what they've done in the Heights, which are smaller units that haven't materially impacted the school population, but that's going to be something that's going to be important to track as well. I understand where Cheryl's coming from on that, but to date, the statistics don't play it out, but doesn't mean we don't have to watch for the future.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought it up, Cheryl. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions?
Now,
Richard?
Claire, question. I'm pretty sure this is a standard protocol, but I hope they're going to do like a traffic evaluation of this, how it's going to impact the area. As it stands right now, traffic has increased quite a bit. Commercial trucking traffic from the exit 10 on the Roten Avenue to the on-ramp. So that traffic has increased quite a bit, which has caused a lot of speeding. Now, if you put a project at the end by the police department over there, this housing is going to increase, again, traffic. So hopefully someone's taken into mind to make sure they monitor that and make sure everything's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have a question, Angel?
No, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay, so regarding the budget, I mean, the Thorndale project will not impact, the schools next year because it's going to take a while for it to get off the ground, but,
It'll be several years.
Pardon?
It'll be several years.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so regarding the budget itself, does anybody have any concerns or questions that they feel did not get answered or anything they'd like to say that they didn't have an opportunity to say this evening?
No.
I just wanted to ask again about the $2 million on the special appropriation on the rules agenda for tomorrow night. Does anybody have any insight into what that is for?
The $2 million that the Board of Ed has to.
Not the Board of Ed, no. A $2 million special appropriation on the Rules Committee agenda for tomorrow night, somehow related to Great Island.
Yes, it's for Great Island to approve the consultants' budgets that I think the proposals ran from 900,000 to 2 million, and the Great Island Committee is meeting in executive session May 1st and 2nd to go over the proposals that they received, and they wanted to approve the 2 million, but by the time it will get to us, they hope to have what the specific number is that they will have negotiated.
Is this the
So
one?
it's consultant fees.
This is the study. This is the consulting study for the master plan for the property.
Okay,
And stages 1 and 2 came in at from 900,000 to 2 million. So they've circled 2 million for the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance because they won't have the final number negotiated, but they expect to by the time we meet in May.
okay.
So I just want to repeat that the optics of asking the Board of Ed to cut $2 million and then approving $2 million for consultant fees for Great Island is not awesome. I don't love that. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, again,
Well,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Claire.
Go ahead. That's
I
all
don't know if you all know this, but at our Park and Recreation meeting a couple of weeks ago, the committee was voting on this year's budget, and I voted no on the whole Park and Rec budget. And my reasoning was because of Pear Tree. And I specifically said that this has been a long time coming and nothing has been done. And the commission hasn't really, in my opinion, pushed the Board of Selectmen to come forward with some kind of an answer, whether we're going or coming or what we're doing on this whole thing. So I agree with Jackie on this also. I mean, you take 2 million from here and then you spend 2 million over here. And I also mentioned that if we can't maintain what we already have, then we shouldn't be putting money into something that's brand new. And so at the end, 2 other people on my committee agreed with me and they voted no on the Park and Rec budget also. So I am still thinking about how I'm going to vote on our budget on the 13th, isn't it? Yeah. And I think there's a lot, I hate to say this, but the Board of Education seems to always have a blank check. And like Jim just said, they've come in at almost over 4%, and it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. I'm just looking at the whole picture that I've seen many times before, and they always go back and go, oh, we'll have to cut the teachers. We can't cut the administrators that we have zillions of, but we have to cut the teachers. And that's when everybody gets all nervous and upset. And I think it's got to go back to the Board of Ed and the superintendent to really evaluate how many principals we need in a school, how many secretaries we need in a school. No offense, Jackie, but how many of the extra people that we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to, and you're cutting a teacher or you're cutting a nurse, and it makes no sense to me. And I think, the blank check, I'm glad that, the Board of Finance said, cut $2 million, but then they're coming back and we have to approve school buses. And where's the liability if we own the school buses? So there's a lot of questions I've had, and I just kind of say, oh, you know what? It's barking up the tree again. But I do think that at some point I just have a feeling you have 2 and 3 bedroom apartments coming online. There's going to be kids in them. It's
If
not
there are
just going to be
if there are
for
3
elderly.
bedroom ones, you're right, Cheryl, there will be.
He's right.
Cheryl, if I can, it's not a blank check, right? And I'm not going to defend them. I mean, this is all public, right? The meetings are public, that there's a public comment period where you can voice it. And I agree on some of the points that you made regarding the ratio of administrators to overall employees. That's fair, but having a healthcare insurance going up 14%, having a bus contract going 12%, special education kids. And this is interesting, right? Because we in this town have 19% of our kids are part of special education. Somehow they receive extra services, right? Which is extremely expensive, but we as a community decided to do it. And there's obviously state mandate, right? To actually, if we cannot offer the services ourselves, it's a state mandate, right? But it's 19% of kids. It's only 12% in New Canaan, right? So maybe, yes, maybe we need to sit down and see whether we are, doing everything right. But this is not a blank check. They're trying to be efficient, and yes, there's some liability with the buses, but it's a big savings. So, let's see what they come back with, and I guess that leads me to, if Cheryl is not sure how she's going to vote, could we somehow could you guys educate me on what our options are actually? Right, because there's a proposal to increase taxes by 4.8%, of which Mr. Palin just mentioned, right? 4.3 goes to taxpayers. There is some use of the general fund, right? What about if we?
I have a couple of comments. First of all, the Board of Ed does not have to release their new budget until July 1.
That's
so
true. Yeah.
we will probably not know what they intend to do and cut until after we vote on May 13th. We cannot increase budgets. So we either support the Board of Ed budget or we cut it further. So that's our options. And the same is true for the Board of Selectmen budget that's before. We either put a cut in, but we're not allowed to add money back. Right. And if we did cut as a RTM body, we could also then calculate what the mill rate would need to be for those taxes that would need to be levied. So the mill rate could actually change as well.
I thought the only thing we could do if we voted it down was it reverted to this year's budget.
No.
Well, I guess you could vote to reduce it by a certain amount. You don't necessarily have to vote the budget down. You know what I'm saying?
We could say we want another $1 million cut from the Board of Selectmen. We want $1 million cut from the Board of Ed. You can do that from the floor of the RTM.
Correct.
Okay.
We have line item veto on the selectmen's budget.
Right, but we don't have it on the.
But not on the Board of
at
Ed.
all. But
Right.
I just wanted to point out that regarding the
That's true.
bus.
Thank you. Yeah.
The bus purchase was done for the special ed program, that was done to reduce the cost, that's the funds that are being spent, with the supplier that they are renegotiating the contract with. So that was presented as a savings. And then the Board of Finance was able to find a way that they could save a little bit more. So that the new bus thing represents a long-term savings.
And the only other thing I wanted to add is somebody mentioned all these special appropriations that keep coming through and how hard it is to keep track of it. And I did want to say that we've been talking about that at finance and budget meetings, because it really, I find it upsetting because it's hard to know what priority something is when it's just a loan, like it's like an A++ priority when it's the only thing you're discussing. So that's something that is being discussed. And sometimes it can't be helped. Like these school buses have to be ordered before July 1. So there was no way to put it in next year's budget. It had to be done through a special appropriation, but that's not always true of everything that we see.
Thank you. Any other comments? And we've been at this about an hour. We got a lot of good information. Does anyone have any other comments to make? Okay. Remember, you can always ask Jim Palin a question. You can, we can discuss again at some point if anybody would like to. And I did send you some information that he had sent to me. So if there are no other comments to make, I would call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks for putting this together, Clara.
Thank you, Clara.
Yes. Thank you, Clara.
Thanks, Clara.
Very
Thank
helpful.
you.
Thanks to
Thank
Mike.
you.
Thanks, Mike.
To Mike for all the technology help. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening.